$12.6 million. That's what Mercy made in its opening weekend against a $60 million budget. I want you to hold that number in your head because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how Amazon MGM handed $60 million to a film that had no business struggling this hard, and how every single warning sign was sitting right there in the open, ignored by everyone who should have known better. Let's go. First, a little context. Mercy was positioned as Amazon MGM's first major theatrical swing of 2026. A sci-fi thriller with a genuinely interesting premise. A detective accused of a crime, put on trial not by a jury of his peers, but by an AI court. A machine deciding human guilt. In 2026, with AI dominating every cultural conversation on the planet, that is not a bad idea for a movie. That is actually a pretty good idea for a movie. The trades were cautiously optimistic. The concept had heat, the cast had names, and Amazon MGM, still figuring out what its theatrical identity looks like post-merger, needed a win. They handed the project to Timur Bekmambetov, the director behind Wanted, the man who made Angelina Jolie bend bullets and made you believe every second of it. He also directed Profile in 2021, a genuinely inventive thriller shot entirely through a computer screen that punched way above its weight class. Bekmambetov is not a safe choice. He's a swinging choice, this could be extraordinary or it could completely fall apart choice. We'll come back to which one it was. Now, let's talk about the cast, because this is where Mercy starts showing you exactly who it thinks it is and who it's trying to sell tickets to. Top billed is Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt is, on paper, one of the safest bets in Hollywood. 2 Guardian films, 2 Jurassic World films. The Tomorrow War pulled 1.8 million viewers on Amazon Prime in its first weekend. The man has a genuine, proven audience. But here's what the data quietly tells you if you look past the franchise numbers. Pratt's original non-IP theatrical projects don't perform the same way. The Tomorrow War went straight to streaming for a reason. His theatrical draw outside of established universes is, let's be honest, unproven at this budget level. What an audience will show up for Chris Pratt in Guardians and what they'll show up for an original sci-fi thriller about AI jurisprudence. Those are 2 very different audiences, and they may not overlap as much as a green light meeting assumes. Second build is Rebecca Ferguson. Genuinely one of the best actors working right now. Mission Impossible, Dune, Dr. Sleep. She elevates every project she's in. She's almost not, by herself, a domestic box office engine. She's a critical credibility signal. She tells you the film is serious. She does not necessarily tell audiences to buy a ticket on opening weekend. So what you have is a cast pairing that looks great on a poster and sends genuinely mixed signals about what kind of film this is. Is it a Chris Pratt action movie? Is it a Rebecca Ferguson prestige thriller? Or is it both? Spoiler, the marketing couldn't decide either, and we'll get to that. Here is the central problem with Mercy as a theatrical proposition, and I want to be precise about this because it's not really a quality argument, it's a positioning argument. The film's premise is legitimately compelling. Chris Pratt plays a detective named Chris Raven, a man convicted by an AI judicial system for a crime the audience spends the film deciding whether he actually committed. The AI isn't a villain in a robot suit, it's a system. Impartial, procedural, and in the film's most interesting moments, genuinely unsettling in the way bureaucracies are unsettling. You can't argue with it, you can't appeal to it, it just decides. That is a real idea. That is a thriller built around something that actually frightens people right now in the real world. Bekmambetov, to his credit, doesn't oversimplify it. The AI court is not evil. Chris Raven may not be innocent. The film holds genuine moral ambiguity for most of its runtime. The runtime, by the way, is roughly 100 minutes. Lean, tight, no fat. And here's the irony. In another era, in the mid-2000s, when Beck Mambetov made his name, a 100-minute sci-fi thriller starring two recognizable faces built around a ripped from the zeitgeist concept would have been exactly what a studio wanted. It would have opened to $35 million and legged out on word of mouth. We are not in the mid-2000s. January 23rd, 2026. That is when Amazon MGM released Mercy into theaters. I want you to think about that date for a moment, because release dates are not chosen randomly. They are chosen deliberately, and they communicate something real about how a studio feels about its own film. January is historically the quietest month in the theatrical calendar. The awards films from November and December are still in theaters. The summer tentpoles are months away. Audiences are recovering from holiday spending. January is where studios park films they're not sure about. Genre films they hope will find an audience in the absence of competition, or prestige films that missed their awards window. Mercy opened January 23rd with relatively soft competition and still made $12.6 million. Now, $12.6 million is not nothing. It is not a catastrophic opening weekend number in isolation, but against a $60 million production budget with marketing costs that industry analysts typically estimate at 50 to 100% of the production budget on a wide theatrical release, we're now looking at a total exposure somewhere in the range of $90 to $120 million. Against $12.6 million on opening weekend. The math is already broken before the second weekend. Here's the off-ramp Amazon MGM had and did not take: clarity. Watch the trailers for Mercy and count how many times the core premise is clearly communicated. A detective on trial, the judge and AI, go. It's in there, but it's buried under action beats, under moodily lit corridor shots, under a score that sounds like every other sci-fi thriller score released in the last 5 years. The marketing could not decide if it was selling a Chris Pratt action film, a Rebecca Ferguson character study, or a Black Mirror episode with a theatrical budget. When you cannot tell an audience in 30 seconds what your movie is and why they should care, you have a marketing problem. And a marketing problem at this budget level is existential. Compare this to the films that successfully sold high-concept sci-fi premises in recent years. Arrival sold you one image, a woman standing before an alien spacecraft, and one question: what do they want? Ex Machina sold you one sentence, a man testing AI to see if it's truly conscious. One sentence, one image. Mercy's equivalent should have been equally simple. A detective is put on trial by the AI he spent his career trusting. Does the machine know something he doesn't? That question is genuinely frightening. That question makes you buy a ticket. It never became the spine of the marketing campaign, and without it, audiences have no hook. Now, here's something that should have worked in Mercy's favor. The production was not a disaster. Principal photography ran approximately 5 weeks in Los Angeles in 2024. No sprawling international shoots, no reported overruns, no on-set crises leaking to deadline. By modern standards, a 5-week shoot on a $60 million film is disciplined. Beck Mambetov, who built his experimental profile out of almost nothing, knows how to work efficiently. So the production cost is real. The $60 million is not padded by chaos or bloat, which means the problems runs deeper than a troubled shoot. The $60 million was spent on the right things: cast, craft, a director who executed the vision, and the film that came out was a coherent, well-made version of what it was trying to be. The market just didn't want it. At least not in theaters, at least not in January. And that is, in some ways, a harder problem to diagnose than a runaway production. You can fix a bad shoot. You cannot easily fix a film that was competently made for an audience that has quietly migrated somewhere else. Let's close this out properly, because the numbers are where the full picture snaps into focus. Opening weekend domestic, $12.6 million. Total domestic run, approximately $23 to $24 million. International added another $26 to $30 million. Global theatrical gross somewhere in the $49 to $54 million range. Studios typically take home roughly 50 to 55% of theatrical gross after exhibitors take their cut. So Amazon MGM's actual revenue from theaters lands around $25 to $28 million. Against a $60 million production budget, and remember, marketing spend on a wide release like this realistically adds another $30 to $40 million minimum. Total exposure, conservatively $90 to $100 million. Total revenue, roughly $25 to $28 million from theatrical. Streaming will soften that landing. Mercy will move to Prime Video. It will find an audience there, and Amazon's integrated model means the calculus is slightly different than a traditional studio. A film that bombs theatrically can still function as a subscriber retention tool on Prime. But that argument only goes so far. A $60 million film greenlit for a theatrical release that ends up justifying itself as a streaming retention tool is not a success story. It's a reframe. It's the studio equivalent of saying, well, we meant to do that. They did not mean to do that. So what exactly happened here? Here's my read, and I want to be precise about it. Mercy is a mid-budget original film, not a sequel, not a franchise entry, not an IP adaptation. Made by a director with a genuine vision, starring two credible actors, built around a concept that is genuinely relevant to the cultural moment. By every traditional measure, that should work. It used to work. The mid-budget original thriller was once the backbone of the studio system. Films in the $40 to $70 million range that weren't trying to be Avengers, that were just trying to be good. The Fugitive, Seven, Collateral. Films that opened solid and ran long on word of mouth. That market has not disappeared, but it has fractured. The audience that would have shown up for Mercy on opening weekend in 2005 is now watching it on a streaming service 3 weeks after release. They're not gone, they're just not going to theaters for it. Not when their couch and a $15 monthly subscription exist. Amazon MGM knows this better than anyone. They own Prime Video, they have the data, and they still bet $60 million on a theatrical run. That is the real question here. Not whether Mercy is a good film, not whether Beck Mumbatov delivered, not whether Pratt and Ferguson did their jobs. The real question is why a studio with direct access to a streaming platform that would have been a perfect home for this exact film decided to send it to theaters first. The answer, probably, is prestige. Theatrical still means something. A film that opens wide in cinemas is a different cultural object than a film that drops on a streaming service on a Friday. It gets reviewed differently. It gets talked about differently. It gets taken seriously differently. Prestige cost money. In Mercy's case, it cost somewhere in the region of $60 million. Mercy is not the worst film of 2026. It is a competent, occasionally genuinely interesting film made by talented people working from a premise that deserved to find its audience. The problem is the audience it deserved is not the audience that goes to theaters in January anymore. And Amazon MGM spent $60 million finding that out. If this video hit different for you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel more than you know. Subscribe if you're new because we do this every week, and drop in the comments which flop movie do you want us to crash cut next. Until then, do the math. Hollywood isn't going to do it for you.